Mr. Speaker, independent experts have suggested that Google is paying an effective tax rate on its UK profits of around 3%. Does the Prime Minister dispute that figure?
Well, let's be clear what we're talking about here. We're talking about tax that should have been collected under a Labour government, raised by a Conservative government. That's what we're talking about. I do dispute the figures that he gives. It's quite rightly this is done independently by HMRC, but I'm absolutely clear that no government has done more than this one to crack down on tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. No government, and certainly not the last Labour government.
Mr. Speaker, my question actually was if the Prime Minister thinks an effective tax rate of 3% is right or wrong. He didn't answer it. The Chancellor of the Exchequer described this arrangement as a major success, while the Prime Minister's official spokesperson only called it a step forward. The Mayor of London described the payment as quite derisory. What exactly is the government's position on this 3% rate of taxation?
But we have put in place the diverted profit tax that means that this company and other companies will pay more tax in future, and more tax in future than they ever paid under Labour, where the tax rate for Google was 0%. That is what we faced. Then let me tell him what we have done. We have changed the tax law so many times that we raised an extra $100 billion from business in the last Parliament. When I came to power, banks didn't pay tax on all their profits, allowed under Labour, stopped under the Tories. Investment companies could cut their tax bill by flipping the currency their accounts were in, allowed under Labour, stopped under the Tories. Companies could fiddle accounting rules to make losses appear out of thin air, allowed under Labour, stopped under the Tories. We've done more on tax evasion and tax avoidance than Labour ever did. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, they're running to catch up, but they haven't got a leg to stand on.
Mr. Speaker, it was under a Labour government that the inquiries were begun into Google, and in addition, as a percentage of GDP, corporation tax receipts are lower under this government than they were under previous governments. I've got a question here, Mr. Speaker, from a gentleman called Jeff. Now, you might well laugh, but Jeff actually speaks for millions of people when he says to me, can you ask the Prime Minister if, as a working man of over 30 years, whether there is a scheme which I can join that pays the same rate of tax as Google and other large corporations? What does the Prime Minister say to Jeff?
Well, what I say to Jeff is that his taxes are coming down under this government and Google's taxes are going up under this government. Let me say to the right honourable gentleman, something he just said in his last question was factually inaccurate. He said corporation tax receipts have gone down. They've actually gone up by 20% under this government because we've got a strong economy with businesses making money, employing people, investing in our country and paying taxes into the Exchequer. And let me say to him, if, like me, he's genuinely angry about what happened to Google under Labour, can I tell him a few people he could call? Maybe he should start by calling Tony Blair. You can get him at JP Morgan. Call Gordon Brown. Apparently you can get him at a Californian bond dealer called PIMCO. He could call Alistair Darling. I think he's at Morgan Stanley, but it's hard to keep up. Those are the people to blame for Google not paying their taxes. We're the ones who got them to pay.
The problem is, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, is responsible to government, and therefore is responsible for tax collection. Mr. Speaker, Google made profits of £6 billion in the UK between 2005 and 2015, and is paying £130 billion in tax for the whole of that decade. Millions of people this week are filling in their tax returns to get them in by the 31st. they have to send the form back. They do not get the option of 25 meetings with 17 ministers to decide what their rate of tax is. Many people going to their HMRC offices or returning them online this week will say this: why is there one rule for big multinational companies and another for ordinary small businesses and self-employed workers?
All those people filling in their tax returns are going to be paying lower taxes under this government. That is what's happening. And I have to say to him, he can, if he wants, criticise HMRC, but HMRC's work is investigated by the National Audit Office, and when they did that, they found that the settlements that they've reached with companies are fair. That is how it works. Now, the Shadow Chancellor's pointing. The Shadow Chancellor, the idea that those two right honourable gentlemen would stand up to anyone in this regard is laughable. Look at the record over the last week. They met with the unions and they gave them flying pickets. They met with the Argentinians, they gave them the Falkland Islands. They met with a bunch of migrants in Calais, they said they could all come to Britain. The only people they never stand up with are the British people and hard-working taxpayers.
I don't know why members opposite find this funny, because it isn't.